Welcome to the From Harm to Healing podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jones, and I'm a therapist who runs the From Harm to Healing treatment program, an online program for men who have engaged in infidelity or compulsive sexual behaviors within the context of an intimate relationship. I started this podcast to illuminate some of the common blind spots within the treatment fields for compulsive sexual behavior or sex addiction through the lens of the Deceptive Sexuality Trauma model. I hope you find this resource enlightening, particularly if you're somebody navigating the pain of betrayal and deception for yourself. Thank you for listening to the From Harm to Healing podcast. I was able to sit down with Trish again recently to have another in-depth conversation about the model, and we really went, as we tend to do, in a few different directions. And so I've decided to split this conversation into 3 separate episodes. And here today is the first part where we talk about something called intentional vibe theory from the model and how it is that we really actually learn to hold trauma. I have another opportunity today to have what I think for me are always really special, important, really illuminating conversations with Trish. So welcome back, Trish. It's so good to have you. And I know we do this for all the people listening to these episodes, particularly the people walking this path of deceptive sexuality trauma. But really, from a selfish point of view, these conversations mean so much to me as well. Mm-hmm. And we will move to our usual ordinary to extraordinary space transition in a moment. But just to, I guess, briefly introduce what we might try and cover today. Anyone that's been listening will know that I recently did the 3-part series on the 22 rooms. A really powerful, impactful, painful way of laying out the traumatic impacts. And that seems to have been incredibly well received. I know it's such an important topic, and it's often putting words, putting language, putting images to things that a betrayed partner implicitly knows in themselves, putting language to something that they implicitly know. So I think today it's a good opportunity with your wisdom and your expertise to really expand on that and try and in even more ways explore, understand, illuminate some of those traumatic impacts. So again, thank you for being here. It really is always an honor to meet with you, and I'm looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel, as you said, selfish in a sense because we get to hang out and, go to a deeper layer with each other and talk about the model, which is so rich and thick, and we could go anywhere with it. You and I often say we could probably spend hours talking with each other about the model, about healing, about those impacted, etc. And I love how you create such safety for me coming into a podcast. Your simple note of it's just us talking, which is a really beautiful way of inviting somebody to land. So, you asked me to do the breath again for us to land together and invite everyone else out there listening to just take a moment and settle in. Take care of yourself through this process as well, because especially this podcast, because it can go very deep and can get very raw in talking about DST-22, which you did beautifully, by the way. Your 3-part series was so delicious, and caring. And people want more because you're singing to their soul, to their hurt soul. You're letting them have information. So I really appreciate how you broke out the 22 rooms over 3 parts. And I mean, honestly, we could probably go for a long time within each of those rooms of impact, Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for that. And what a great leaping point into today, podcasts we're doing today, So I invite everyone to close their eyes. Notice your breath. And this is all about creating the space together to release the ordinary space outside and land in this extraordinary space inside this deep conversation with Chris and I, and perhaps in conversation with yourself as you listen. So on the inhale, we approach the space, we ready ourselves. On the exhale, we ride the wave of the breath into these conditions. So I invite you now to inhale deeply. Exhale, ride the wave of the breath into the conditions of integrity, adequate safety, humility. And then take another inhale deeply. Follow the exhale in a deeper connection with yourself. Whatever that means for you, land there. Making contact with yourself as best you can. Honoring you, your breath, your heart, your soul. And then inhale deeply. Exhale, clear the space and enter the conversation with Chris and I.
I always love the way you really slow things down like that. And then that really leads us straight into our material. And we've got the 22 rooms. We've got a really good foundation there. And I think people listening to this hopefully have that foundation. And the idea of 3 phases, 3 separate phases where different types of traumatic impacts are happening. So again, I know you have additional ideas, pictures, metaphors, thoughts about how we can understand that. So I'd love it if you're willing to just lead us in that and go where you want to go with that.
Sure, I'd be honored. Yeah. Always thrilled for this in our conversation. I'm going to bring back in something you've shared in other podcasts about intentional vibe, trauma theory, and treatment. So just to differentiate treatment versus theory, theory is a concept, right? It's an idea and how to hold space. And treatment is really about this embodied and anchored space that's all about deep listening, therapeutic presence, holding space, and letting the person in the room unfold and unwind. Hold them with dignity, high regard, tenderness, compassion. And we create this sacred container, right, for this intentional vibe trauma treatment. We create this container that is one where we are so not in the way of what is showing up in the room. And at the same time, we're meeting them there. We're holding space for them to arrive, to land finally, to catch their breath. I mean, if we remember, this place of humility is super important. When we drop into ATC, approach, transition, condition, the breath we do, one of the conditions is humility. And that is to truly be open and curious with the other person. I go back to deep listening, really sitting back in yourself so that that person can take space and let them tell you who they are. Let them show you who you are, who they are, you know? It's important because they enter the room in such rawness with all this complexity. They come in with immense fracturing, flailing, desperation, out of breath. They don't know where to land. So if we hold IVTT for them to land in, they actually hopefully begin to settle enough that they feel safe enough in that moment. Because out there, they're not feeling safe enough. They're in the hyper states of living. They're in survival. So when they enter treatment, what's really important from this space of IVTT is to be able to catch them catch them in their tears, in their hunger for information, in their hunger for understanding. It's to hold them in their destabilization. It's to slow them down so they can find a sense of self for a moment. They've been uprooted, so we need to create that environment for them. And in doing that, we teach them to do it for themselves. That moment, from this model, IVTT, is really about let me catch my breath. I think about the secret sexual basement, and I started developing a metaphor, for those above the secret sexual basement. And it's called the dark cave of unlit truth. And they are living in this dark cave of unlit truth and they don't even know it. And so both the secret sexual basement and the dark cave of unlit truth are not breathing. One is feverish underneath in that covert phase, feverish, just sucking up all the air. They're not breathing. They're in desperation. One above can barely breathe and they don't know it. So it's like no one's breathing really. There isn't an aliveness truly. And then the intersection, the relationship, we think of the covert phase, as you so beautifully unpack that, it is all about erosion. They're losing their breath. They're losing their sense of knowing. They're losing relationship and safety in that way. And they don't know it. Neither truly know it. Because in the basement, there's such an unconscious state. They don't even know they're not breathing. So there's no breathing happening. So all the more important to help them catch their breath long enough. Because there is a sound when the two worlds collide in that exposure phase. It's like an explosion, like a burst of frantic clawing. They're clawing for ground. They are gasping for their breath. It's like, that kind of sound, like, oh my gosh, they're trying to hold themselves together. There's so much going on. It's like the dark cave of unlit truth just exploded and burst into the secret sexual basement. And they're both flailing. And as I mentioned earlier, it's just this immense fracturing happening. And no one truly can really hold that unless they hold intentional vibe trauma, therapy, or treatment in a certain way. Unless they really say, I'm here to hear you, I'm here to hear your story, and I'm here to use, from our lens, right, the 5 stages of treatment to truly help you identify. And those are naming the truth of what's happening is stage 1. Stage 2, stabilization. You and I know these, we're just renaming them, right? Stage 3, metabolization, which is all what they need. They need that 1, 2, and 3 solid in order to get to stage 4 and 5, which is all about, photosynthesis, right, from our lens, which is the reshaping and reconstructing and reclaiming space so that they can actually enter a space of new oxygen, new air, so they can actually feel a full breath again, feel some sense of aliveness again. And so as they move through those 3 phases, 1, covert phase, that erosion, 2, the exposure phase, which you beautifully impact as well, showing that we have 2 wards. We have injuries and symptoms. We look at the explosion of that, and then we hit the symptom progression phase, which is like this dragging through even more information and impact over and over again. Like, again, there's no breathing room. So we want to do the stages of treatment so that they can land one door impact at a time, not all doors open, where we can see some people that are eager meeting them in that frantic place of the amygdala firing and the reptilian firing and saying, get me through these rooms. And the other person, although well-intentioned, might drag them by their neocortex through all those rooms instead of going, wait a minute, slow down. Let's sit here together. Let me hear what this is for you. Covert phase, 3 rooms, 1, 2, and 3. Exposure phase, we've got, again, the injuries, 4 through 8 that you named. And I'll name those again later later in this podcast. Then we have 9 through 14, which is all that PTSD symptomology. And then we have 15 through 22, which is that ripple effect you mentioned. So many punches and hits along the way is exhaustive, and dragging. And then, in all of that, when we hold the entirety of DST 22, we see such a hit to identity and belonging. And so when they enter the room, we have to hold them there and help them land there in the reality of that has shattered. And the insurmountable path of healing, that they land in. You mentioned the 3 phases and we're naming them. We also talk about the 4 critical injuries, like we could land anywhere here. And those 4 are really important as well. The 4 critical injuries, as we know, are reality ego fragmentation, which is room 7 in the exposure phase. Then we have the erosion of the gut, right? The enteric system. That's room 2 in the covert phase. And then we have acute relational rupture attachment injury, which is room 8 in the exposure phase. These are all critical injuries. And then we have CTS6, which I know you've mentioned before, which is complex trauma shaping the 6 systems. That means our relationship with our thoughts, our relationship with our emotions, relationship with our sense of self, our ego, identity, our relationship with abuse and the abuser, the person who caused harm, who abused our sense of trust, our sense of choice, our relationship to others and the world, and our relationship to meaning. All those are shattered and cracking. So we are holding so much fracturing when they enter the room. That is why it is of utmost importance how we enter the room and meet them. That's why the breath that we do before we even have these conversations, Chris, is like key. I do a breath like this before every session I have. I clear the space for that person to arrive.
Just naming those injuries again, those critical injuries, naming the phases, all these different angles we can come at it from. It gives us that sense of just how much there is to carry there. It's not one big injury. It's all of these different things, each one being hugely significant, but all these things piled on top of each other. And that's why it's then interesting when you start thinking, how do we actually deal with that? What is it to hold that, to provide treatment? Because you can't provide 22 different unique types of treatment at the same time. And so you've introduced this idea, this intentional vibe theory, or intentional vibe trauma treatment. And really just so I guess people listening are clear on that, we're really linking to that idea of moving from ordinary to extraordinary space, the approach, transition, conditions. And this idea that again has come up in other episodes I've done with Omar, with yourself, of it being about the vibes, the vibrations, the sort of energy in the room, the energy coming off the person. So as the treatment professional, and obviously also in the attending work within the relationship, it's really challenging sometimes when we want the technique. We want this is the sentence you say, this is the technique you use. We want to AVR or whatever it is. And I know it can be frustrating sometimes for clients when you say something like, no, it's about the vibes. It's about the body language. It's about the tone. It's about, we don't want that. We want no, this is what you say and this is what fixes it. So it then links to that point you also bring in about humility. So I guess starting as the treatment professional, you are really trying to model exactly, so certainly for the men I work with, exactly what you need them to do to be able to attend well. You actually, as the professional, are trying to model that, slowing down,
Hmm.
taking a breath, being grounded in yourself. The sort of vibrations coming off of you are healing, holding, containing vibrations. It's really hard to teach that. There's a lot of kind of work involved implicitly in that. And just quickly, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but I did an episode a while back now where I talked a little bit about my professional journey and starting training as a therapist in Rogerian theory, which is very much about the conditions, techniques, empathy, unconditional positive regard, and congruence or integrity. And I shared on the podcast that one of the things for me was when I started doing that training, my attitude was, yeah, that's great. But when do we learn the real stuff? Like, when does the powerful stuff come in? And that kind of betrayed my own sense of I want to be able to fix. But there is so much power in being able to just provide the right conditions. If you can do nothing else but provide the right conditions, you are already creating a space where healing can happen. So it's a bit of a tangent there, but I love bringing it back to this idea of vibes that are so important in this model.
Yeah, not really a tangent because I think we're in the same vein here. It's like, I'm with you that humanistic psychology is so important. And this rush to have all this knowledge, right? And be the person that names it all the time is so, we hunger for that sometimes because we want to help. Like you named, we want to fix. And at the same time, what's truly helpful is to sit back in that pause and be so present that that's the vibration. It's the pause, and they can actually feel your presence. That's true holding. That's where the true unwinding starts to happen. And they begin to trust themselves. They begin to really listen to themselves. When I was in grad school, um, for graduation, they took one of my quotes and they put it on this huge banner. And I remember when I walked in, I was like, oh, that's my quote. And it is, as we brush against another spirit, may our hearts awaken and embrace compassion. And that is such a pause moment, because when those individuals and injured relationships come into the room to seek guidance and a landing point, that's what we're doing. We're pausing in this place of deep compassion, no matter who is in that room. They're showing up. I'm not there to bash them and shame them. I'm there to hold space, reflect sometimes a hard mirror, which is important. That's compassionate as well, to speak truth, to name abuse, to name victimization. That's compassionate. And if we pause and warm them up to that, they're able to hold that and create true change. So we're back to that. When they can truly name what has happened, it gives them an opportunity. Whether it's the partner flailing, whether it's the person who caused harm, whether it's the injured relationship. Chris, you and I often share a little bit about people we've worked with, confidentiality, right? Also, but we share just the moments where they really feel like they're dipping into that deeper part of themselves is because we are holding space like that. It's not manufactured. It's a deep process of almost like an archaic healing, what it is to be human at a very deep level, like very Jungian, concepts, metaphors.
Yeah. And I think that's with this model, one of the beautiful things that we've reflected on together is that in one sense, it is a very cognitive, very intellectual model. I'm sure people listening to this have almost learned a second language of acronyms and ideas and clinical language. And it's also a model that can be taught, I would argue, in even more depth through picture, through metaphor. I was reading something earlier actually that was talking about that. We like to believe that we are very rational and logical and sort of cognitive, and that we learn through information. Actually, the messages people really get tend to be through image, through parable, through metaphor.
Mm.
And all through this, right from the secret sexual basement itself to the tightrope and the safety net for the attachment injury, the ink in the water for the reality fragmentation, the home above crashing into the basement, all of these kind of pictures we have, I think they give us more information sometimes than the clinical language. So yeah, definitely there's some incredible power there in our ability to just sit with picture, sit with metaphor.
Beautiful. Yeah, and when you go through the rooms, the 22 rooms, it's not just pictures, there's sound as well. I'm just thinking about, I have done this quite a few times. I've done it in trainings with Omar and shared about the DST 22. I've done it in other talks, of sharing the vibration that's happening, the sound of deceptive sexuality trauma. But also, I just want to tag back into something you're saying. The metaphors, also the people in the room really cherish the right brain activity, even though, I don't want to do right brain. I don't want to do drawing. I don't want to do painting. But the minute they sink in, what comes out of that is so powerful because it's a different story. It's the story that got stored so deep inside that when we lift it out, they can make more sense of it now. They're like, oh, it's just a bunch of scribbles. And then when we sit with them again in that pause, we see more of them. We sit back and let them tell their story differently. And that is healing. That's kind of what you're naming with the metaphors. It's a deeper healing. It's all that embodied processing, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of funny you mentioned that because talking with a client about that recently and doing the right brain exercises we mentioned about going through the rooms, and some of them contain these ideas of draw this injury, draw your interpretation of this injury. And yeah, with certain people you kind of see their body language almost drop, like, oh no, I've got to do drawing. And one of the things we can say that if we're doing this work as therapists, we've had to do this work ourselves as well, because the training is quite an experiential one. And I remember doing this with, probably you were there as well, and Omar in the training, and doing the work ourselves, looking at these rooms and really doing our own interpretation. And I am an awful, awful artist. There's things I'm good at. That is not one of them at all. And very, very self-conscious about it. And I remember having that experience of like, oh no, what's he got us doing now? This is ridiculous. And I tried my best to do as good a drawing as I could. And then as we were going around and sharing them, Omar shared his, and it was basically just a scribble. And there was like a real lesson there for me. Like, here I am more concerned. Like, we talk about humility, right? Here I am more concerned about trying to avoid the shame of a bad drawing. And Omar himself just did a scribble because that was the authentic expression for him. And so, to your point, there is something about when we let go of the kind of feelings we have around those things and just kind of be in that room and see what comes up. I was talking to this same person about when we're talking about the rooms. Don't overthink the language you're using, the tone you're using, how you're drawing a picture. The more authentic it is, what comes out, the better. And so that was kind of a big lesson for me in humility and kind of getting the cognitive out of the way a little bit. But tying this back to the intentional vibe theory, the idea is part of the way we're going to feel safe to really let go with that stuff is when there is adequate safety in the room. And that's going to come from the vibes in the room. People aren't going to be able to really go to those deep places if they're not feeling adequately safe in the room.
I remember that time very clearly. I was the one leading it. And I remember Omar just jumped right in and he participated. So talk about role modeling, showing humility, showing a space of being authentic and genuine, which is key no matter who shows up in that room, right? Whether we're a therapist, a coach, a teacher, a guide, a professional who's helping, or the person impacted. The key is let me show you me, you know? And that healing is all about what we're talking about is allowing the deeper part of us to be revealed and move the shame out of the way. I'm not an artist either. Chris. I might do more like Pollock type stuff where I'm just like throwing paint on a canvas and it turned out kind of cool. And that's like an expression. But as far as drawing, I'm more a stick figure kind of person.
And when we do those exercises, there's always that person in the room that says, "Oh, I can't draw," and then they present this masterpiece. That's not me. I'm not being false humility here. I really can't. So, just a message for anyone who might find themselves doing this kind of work. It really isn't about quality. It's about the expression.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of courage, to be so vulnerable because you don't know what's going to come out of that prompt and then your drawing. Whatever the prompt is, draw whatever's coming to your mind about room or the covert phase or something like that. We never know what will happen for that person. And, it's something you can keep going back to and have a new perspective every time you go back.
And I've always, I think, really, I was going to say envy. That's probably not the right word, but I think we all approach this stuff differently. We all have our different ways. There's a model, but there's then unique humans approaching that model. And a lot of the work I do is quite cognitive, especially because I usually am working with men quite early or certainly new to the model. Lots of psychoeducation, lots of depth of information there and really trying to integrate the understanding. But I know one of your real gifts, I think, is being able to do that deeper work and working in person, certainly more than I do, really taking people to that place. And it takes, again, it's not so much technique, but it takes an incredible amount of connection with the self and lots of other things like that to really be able to take people there. So I think it's a wonderful thing that you're able to do with that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I want to move into the sound from there, what you're naming. I think it's a nice connection point here. The sound of deceptive sexuality trauma.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the From Harm to Healing podcast. If you'd like to find out more information about the deceptive sexuality trauma model itself, you can visit minwalamodel.com. If you're interested in the services that I offer, in particular the From Harm to Healing treatment program, please visit chrisjonestherapy.co.uk.